Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to give it a few minutes while our attendees log in. And thank you all so much for being here. And I'll give it a couple minutes to let everybody get situated. All right. It is officially 6:05. So I'm gonna get us started. I know we're gonna have more folks log in, but welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's webinar, Thriving in Place. We are grateful to our sponsors, both for Mobility Month and for tonight's event. Those sponsors are Faison, LeGrand Elbash, Morrison Yard Residences, Smithy Ironware Company, Lowcountry Rapid Transit, and West Edge. If you don't know me, I'm Katie Zimmerman, Executive Director of Charleston Moves. Charleston Moves is a nonprofit organization advocating for safe, connected, and equitable walking, biking, and busing in Charleston County. We focus both on getting the infrastructure and the policies in place to ensure transportation and recreation choice in our region. Transportation choice means better access to affordable food and housing, job security, an improved local economy, civic participation, cleaner air and water, climate change mitigation, improved public health, and reduced traffic congestion. May is National Bike Month, but locally, we at Charleston Moves host an annual event series that we call Mobility Month, because we want to focus on bringing the community together to elevate safety and accessibility for multiple modes of transportation, in addition to celebrating bikes. After tonight, we still have 2 events remaining for Mobility Month, so please make sure to go to our website, charlestonmoves.org, to check out the details. This evening, we have national and local experts discussing community-led revitalization, as well as the issues of social determinants of health and quality of life as they relate to transportation equity. We will start with the nationally renowned Majora Carter, a real estate developer, urban revitalization strategy consultant, MacArthur Fellow, and Peabody Award-winning broadcaster. We are honored that she is joining us today and excited to hear her strategies for communities to thrive in place. And Majora, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I am very excited to be here. So you could already see my screen. Now I need to make sure that I can see it. And but really, I'm super excited to be here because I feel, so much of my early work really was all about. It was about mobility. It was about people's willingness and ability to be able to be in the place where they were, move through it freely in a way that actually inspired them to want to stay where they were and to find value in it. So yeah, I wrote this book about it called Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And so in this really very brief talk, because I'm going to be seeing you guys soon, in a few months as well, like in person, which is great. So, but I just want to be clear, like I use a term low status, which is generally the kind of word that people find a little uncomfortable because it is and implies that there's a higher status and then a lower status. And that is what, when we think about some communities and you kind of know them where you are, the places where health outcomes are worse, where the educational attainment's worse, where you don't have great options for different types of food, et cetera, in your area. But most they're the places where inequality is simply assumed. by people both living in and outside of those neighborhoods. And so that's what low status, as we refer to it, actually means. And they're often the places where you consider them, where you have people that are considered the places where, excuse me, where people both living inside and outside those neighborhoods assume you have to measure success by how far you get away from the community. And so, but given mobility, the fact that it can either sort of act as either, a siphon, right? Literally moving people out of a place, or it could be an injection, of something wonderful, into the place. And I like to think of those terms in terms of actual local economic development and capital, because the bike lanes that you're building, that you're advocating for, getting people to love the idea of different types of public transit, could be the difference between those communities thriving through the type of local economic developments that happen there, and what we actually refer to as a talent retention approach to community development, which assumes that there's always been great talent in those communities, but we often tend to feel as though that we need to measure success by how far we get away from those neighborhoods. So with that, I use the example of my own community, as a way to help people see what it's like when a neighborhood is sort of built on the idea that it actually repels talent versus attracts it, and excuse me, versus retaining it, the way that successful companies like to do with their own businesses. So part of that is, I grew up in during a time in actually the late 60s and early 70s, in the South Bronx in New York City, that was actually considered, had much of more of a talent repulsion strategy. This is literally, we had so much, there was financial disinvestment. Landlords were torching their buildings to collect insurance money. This particular building was actually on my walk on the way to the subway to get me to my high school, which was called the Bronx High School of Science, one of the best high schools in the entire country. And but for me, that was my ticket out of my neighborhood to literally help me move to greener pastures. Like once I got into college and all that stuff. So it was sort of like a talent repulsion strategy, in place. Like literally every step I took was making me feel as though I needed to move further away from my neighborhood. Um, and so I wasn't the only one moving away. We used to be a light, walk to work community where there was a residential core, and then lots of and then lots of light industries that actually employed people in light manufacturing, and provide jobs for folks. Much of that went away because of the disinvestment that happened in the neighborhood from redlining, financial discrimination, yeah, definitely the type of arson that happened, when landlords were torching buildings to collect insurance money. What took its place was much of this kind of like municipal infrastructure, things like the kind of things, whether it was waste facilities or power plants, and those kind of things took its place. But for me, so again, I was taught to measure success by how far I got away from the neighborhood. And when I did that, one of the things that, I had to come home only to, because I needed a cheap place to stay when I was starting graduate school, which I went to NYU. So I had to move back into my parents' house. And it was such a defeat for me. But the great thing was, it was just like literally, I think, heaven sent that I was sent back to my neighborhood at that time, because that's when we discovered that the city and state were wanted to build a huge waste facility on our waterfront. And because of that, um, I actually, because I had some education and some distance, realized that it was only happening because we happened to be a poor community of color. And with that, I actually got myself mobilized to think I could actually be a part of the solution that could help my community. And so part of that was not just working on the solid waste advocacy, to have like a much more equitable approach to managing our solid waste that didn't openly discriminate against communities of color, but it was also about trying to plan for the kind of community that we wanted to see in our own neighborhood. And so I know this doesn't look like much, but but this was actually what turned out to be a dead end of, a map city street that dead ended at the Bronx River. We actually discovered that we could write a proposal that was going to help us do restoration projects along the Bronx River in these areas. And so when we did, we realized that this could be an opportunity for us to help revitalize our community, make people believe that there was something of value in our own place. And that was a really kind of amazing notion for us. And so that tiny little seed grant was actually something that we were able to use to actually, we paid for lunch for volunteers. We got some little projects going on down there. We realized that we needed to create programming on that little transformed spit of a piece of land that would allow people to come and enjoy the space that they were a part of. From boat building programs to canoe rides. Old senior citizen centers would come and do like dance parties down there. It was really very cute, but it was all about just getting people into the idea that our place could be something of value to go to. And it was, so this is one of my favorite photos in the world, because you see I'm simply posing, and this was at the groundbreaking for the event. And so it went from this to, this was our little beta version. And then later on, we got this. This is the Hunts Point Riverside Park after the $3 million dollars of redevelopment that went into it. And it was a really amazing moment for people to literally start to walk down the hill toward the water in their neighborhood, which they didn't even know there was water there because it was a dump there before. And they were able to be transformed by the transformation of this little bit of waterfront, that allowed them to see the neighborhood in a very, very different way. And we have that the South Bronx does have that in common with Charleston. We're a waterfront community too. So there you go. So I find, and what's so interesting is that it really helped people kind of, at first they were just like, this almost isn't for us, because we didn't have anything like so nice in our neighborhood. Oh yeah, and I got married there back in 2006 as well. And actually, I wouldn't have gone into that dump had I not been for that awesome dog that you see right now, because I had an 80-pound dog with me. That's the reason why I was able to feel strong enough to walk into what I thought was a dump, because there were weeds over and piles of garbage over my head. But, I love you, Zena. So there you go. I got married there, which was really great. And we've actually won national awards for the kind of, excellence in urban design that park represented. But we wanted to take it further, because again, we felt very much isolated as a community. And part of what we did was really think about, well, like, you know part of it's moving through our neighborhood, and also connectivity, being connected, also having people come to see us as well. Like, and we realized that this thing called the Greenway, which I know you're all familiar with, that there's this East Coast Greenway that goes all the way from Maine to Miami, and it literally bypassed the South Bronx. And I was like we almost didn't even exist. And I think that meant something to me, that like we people literally, that a map was made to avoid us, like a whole route was made to do that. And so I made it my business, and I really wanted to be a part of this connectivity that made us a part of like a bigger picture. And so I started working, and I actually raised $1.25 million dollars of federal transportation dollars to come to our community, and to design the South Bronx Greenway. That was just for the feasibility study, for both on water and on street bike paths as well, to connect us to ourselves, but also to the Greenway, and also to the rest of the South Bronx, excuse me, the East Coast Greenway. And so we started doing, so there was some traffic calming projects that went into it. And then of course the greenery came later on. And the whole point was to literally make it so that people could walk through the community, and eventually also be connected to the East Coast Greenway. But really, it was about, how do you create these paths so that people could feel like it was safe for them to walk through the neighborhood and actually have something pretty to look at while they did it. So those kind of things were really great. And also another thing that we were super excited that it did was allow us to be connected to this absolutely fabulous, park that's actually in one of the islands within New York City. It's called Randall's Island. And the South Bronx was actually separated from it by only like 25 feet of water, literally like a little tiny little strip of water. And so this connection to the Greenway actually made it so that you could walk from the South Bronx into that really amazing park that was there. But still, as much as we loved having the parks in our community, after not having them for more than 60 years, we realized that there was still this kind of attitude from folks within our community, again, a low status neighborhood, that was feeling like they needed to leave the neighborhood. And in part because, especially like high school students, who would literally, who were graduating high school and going to college. And we've had more of them over the past, 10 years. graduating, going to college than we had over the last 30 years. And they in particular were, I mean, I think many of the people, all the people that we surveyed kind of often said the same thing, that they felt as though that what the neighborhood needed now were things like more waste facility, excuse me, was more health clinics and, affordable housing for very poor people, homeless shelters, because that's all they saw the neighborhood being. And it was true to form, because that's basically what the nonprofits and most of our elected officials, really spoke about, in terms, it was almost a part of the culture that was in our community. But what we thought was really interesting was that these same kids made it really clear that they did not want to come back to the neighborhood because of all those markers of poverty that were being presented to them. So we had to ask ourselves, like, is poverty a cultural attribute? Is it something that's worth preserving? And when we realized that no, we didn't think that that was the case, but unfortunately, many in the nonprofit industrial complex absolutely kind of set it up so that those were the kinds of developments that we saw in our communities happening, the same kind of things that these young people were saying they didn't want to be a part of. And we realized that as part of the work that was happening there, we realized that we had to be asking people within the community, what are you looking for, in the neighborhood that you desire? Is it the kind of things that we see continuously being developed in our neighborhood? More of the same, whether it's more health clinics and community centers, or the things that they didn't want to see, especially, the dog poop, the litter, just like many more, the type of infrastructure that people feel that they don't want to see, that they don't see in neighborhoods unless they're low status. What they wanted and what they spent their money on were the kind of things like coffee shops and family restaurants and parks and things of that nature. They wanted housing that matched their income, couldn't really find it in their own communities, but they knew that were the kind of things that they wanted to see happening. And so, but all of that to say is that when, and I don't think so, we saw two kinds of development in the community. Everything we saw, the kind that was assumed that gentrification would happen, with low status neighborhoods, we see two kinds of real estate development. One is what we assume is gentrification, where prices go up and you see wealthier people coming into neighborhoods like this. And then the other type is what we call poverty level economic maintenance, which are the homeless shelters, affordable housing for only the lowest income bands, not great access to different types of great and affordable food options or anything like that. And but really what people felt is that, those two types of development left absolutely no room for either one of them. And so that's why the talent um, repulsion strategy would take place. But as a note about gentrification, like, honestly, I don't think that gentrification happens when you start to see things like doggy daycares, come into, or cute coffee shops and places where you didn't see them before. I think gentrification starts to happen when people in our own communities don't see the value, of their own communities. And so that's why I think it's super important when you're thinking about the work that you're doing with Charleston Moves. It's like, are you working, in terms of creating this really necessary bike infrastructure? Are you also doing it in a way that actually is going to, support the talent retention in the low status communities that infrastructure is going through, and using it as a way to promote economic equity within those communities to support them? So that I think is a super important thing to do, because ultimately that's what's going to make those communities socially and economically strong, period. If the folks there actually have opportunities to create more local economic well-being for themselves. Because honestly, people who are economically empowered are harder to push around. So it was really important, for things like, this is meant to. This is a really interesting thing, because those type of signs, which you often see in low status communities before the gentrification starts, we would pull those down. And ultimately, at one point we put them on an Instagram post many years ago. And but the folks someone who followed us was just like, we found these things so aggravating that she would have her kids actually call up people and say things like, get away from my inheritance, which I thought was just a brilliant thing to do. But ultimately, the talent retention strategy for community development, which your work plays a tremendous part in all of it. It's having a beautiful, high quality built and natural environment. It's about having commercially viable spaces, whether they're coffee shops, whether they're bike shops, libraries, all those type of things that make people feel like their community is worth coming to and staying in, and yeah, being visited, by people that coming in, to take full advantage of a beautiful place and hopefully drop dollars in there as well. And of course, we want it beautiful for the people that live there too. Quality housing for local residents and a range of incomes is so important going through. Nobody wants their communities to be conflated with being poverty stricken. And so that's why it's really important, for folks who see the value of, in particular, transit and transit oriented development, the same way that Charleston Moves does. You're using this moment in time before everything starts to really be brought online to help support the folks in those low status communities to stay a part of their communities, because it will be, I think, advocacy organizations making those moves and saying, like, no, 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 it's not just about creating a bike path so that, essentially developers and other, and the folks that support them, whether it's through the nonprofit industrial complex or, elected officials who do that, but they're also creating opportunities for people in those communities to economically empower themselves. And so part of our talent retention strategy was about creating those little nudges within our own community so that people could feel like their community was worth staying in. And then by association, then they would do the things to keep and retain wealth in their own family and to make it themselves, but literally to reinvest themselves within their own community. So remember this crack house that I used to walk by on my way to the subway to get me to this great high school. Well, we used that same spot, which is, and transformed it into the Boogie Down Grind Cafe, many years later. So this is now, it's an urban hip hop themed coffee shop, that celebrates hip hop, which is our culture, because that's the South Bronx and that's where it started. And seeing some of that has just been in a really tremendous place. People do open mics there, talent shows. We have credit repair workshops. We've had an enormous, it's literally both the space and the people in it are the attraction. So again, creating those spaces so people can come, spend money there. We frankly, the cafe itself, it actually is buoyed up by actually people coming to visit, and spending money there. But it creates the kind of vibe that actually allows people in our own communities to feel like, a sense of pride and hope about the place that they're in. But I also think it's really important to say that this is a different kind of approach, to doing, development in the low status community. These kind of things also sometimes, will attract attention because it is different. But but I really truly do not believe that you're going to, when you start talking about development in communities, that you not having folks in low status communities not be a part of it, a part of the economic development, you're doing more harm than good. Because essentially, again, economically empowered people are harder to push around. Economically disempowered people are easy to push around. And unfortunately, that's what we see more of in low status communities. So when groups like Charleston Moves it is doing the great work of creating access within those communities through bike and transit infrastructure and being real focused about it. The other part of that is literally recognizing that those same neighborhoods could be in jeopardy, from the development pressures that are looking at the work you're doing and going, oh, that's going to be the next great place. However, if Charleston Moves can say, like, look, we can create, to go to places like this and still, you make sure that you're keeping the culture that's there, but supporting them economically. Let's say somebody does want to open up a cafe, in one of those communities, or they're building bike shops, making sure that people are spending dollars and creating the infrastructure, the lifestyle infrastructure that allows people to look at those places and be excited about them. Groups like Charleston Moves have so much power to help create and support equity in those neighborhoods. It's a really important thing. But just even though I say that, I want to be real clear times there will be some folks, who will not be happy. And there's just that there's always going to be people who are not going to be happy because is fearful. Is promotes fear in a lot of people. For example, some social justice activists, when we opened a coffee shop, they thought that it was just the harbinger of gentrification, and we were actually protested. So sometimes these things happen too. But ultimately, since we know the history of our country, and we know that you have to economically, put people on a path that and support them so that they can actually be the tools for their own economic recovery, that those are the type of things that make it really important to know. So yeah, so listen, we got protested. Hopefully you won't ever get protested. But the point is that it was an ironic kind of thing that happened to us that essentially was about people like responding more to the fearful kind of things that happen around local development, as opposed to recognizing that this type of local development actually created investment opportunities for local folks. It was also really ironic that the day that we were being protested, we were doing a workshop or hosting a workshop for a group that was offering 0% interest loans to local homeowners and also to small business owners. So again, creating an economic foundation for people to be able to fully participate in the future of their own communities as it gets better because of things like bicycle infrastructure is an important note that I think we really have to embrace and recognize that we have more power when we talk about these things than when we don't. So we need to recognize as we do that groups like Charleston Moves could literally be at the center of creating equity in places that it might literally have rolled on by. So I'm super excited about actually meeting you in person within the next couple months, and also seeing like how you've like are using the great tools and the work that Charleston Moves has already done in order to help the low status communities in your network literally develop and grow into more prosperous and healthy places, in large part because of the work that you've been able to facilitate all these years. So with that, I am just super thankful that you invited me, and yeah, just thank you for having me.
Majora, thank you so much. That we have a lot of work to do. And that's a good thing. And that was amazing. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us. And Majora has to move on to her next engagement. But for those of you who have questions for her, as she mentioned, she's going to be in North Charleston in September to keynote Metanoia's 20th anniversary luncheon. And we are coordinating with Majora and Metanoia to hold a meet and greet and learn about her latest book while she's in town. So this will not be the last time you get to interact with Majora. And so I hope all of you will make sure to spread the word when we've got those details finalized and
Yes.
to come out and we get to meet Majora in person and just, utilize all of her wonderful knowledge and her experience in making communities better while still thriving in place, keeping people in place, happier in place, which is what we want.
Wow. And thank you guys for having me. And I can't wait to meet you in person. All right. Take
Thank
good
you
care.
so much. Thanks. You too.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
So let me mess around with my lack of Zoom knowledge. Okay, here we go. So we're going to move on to our panel discussion with our local experts. And our local experts today are Renee Linyard-Gary, Nick Osborne, and Cody Tettemer, moderated by Dr. Kim Butler Willis. And these folks are brilliant. And so we're so excited that they're able and willing to join us today for this. Dr. Kim Butler Willis is the founder and co-managing director of GOODSTOCK Consulting, LLC, an organizational development firm specializing in strategic planning, community engagement, and equity, diversity, and inclusion training with clients across the Southeast. So I'm going to turn things over to you, Kim, and I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. But yes, if folks have things they want to put in the chat, feel free.
Thanks, Katie. It's pretty exciting on a Tuesday night to be compared to the Boogie Down Bronx, right? I mean, we must be on to something great here in Charleston. And that was such an exciting presentation. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from Majora when she comes down to Metanoia. But again, thank you, Charleston Moves, for the opportunity to moderate what I believe is a very important conversation with a few of my friends here in Charleston across the Tri-County. Now, as we discuss transportation needs and issues in the region, and I think Majora has really set up a nice conversation, we'll also have to consider how transportation impacts every aspect of our lives. And so the CDC, as many of you will know, defines social determinants of health as the conditions in which we work, live, play, learn, pray, and age. If you're in public health, you probably memorized that mantra, right? And a major through line to each of these conditions is really transportation. Now, this evening, as Katie mentioned, we have a panel of regional leaders from 3 different social determinant sectors in order to discuss how transportation impacts the services they provide and the clients that they serve every day. Again, as Katie mentioned, we invite your questions. It would be great if you add them to the chat box or to the Q&A. If you add them to chat, everyone can see them. If you add them to Q&A, our host will moderate those. And as you add those questions, we have reserved some time for Q&A, but if you ask anything that's relevant to the conversation that we're having right now, I'll be sure to weave that on in. So first things first, I'm going to stop talking so that you can meet the real rock stars here. And rather than me reading bios for each, I'd like for them to introduce themselves and give a little background about their organizations, but also tell us how your organization acknowledges or addresses transportation needs for your clients and or patients. And let's start with Cody.
Hi, everyone. Good evening and happy Mobility Month. My name is Cody Tettemer. I'm a housing attorney at Charleston Pro Bono Legal Services. If you are unfamiliar, Charleston Pro Bono Legal Services provides pro bono legal services to Charleston County residents. I'm a housing attorney, but we do offer legal assistance in family law, estate planning, and we have a human trafficking attorney as well. And then again, all of these services are free of cost to Charleston County residents, so long as they're no income or low income. For our organization, it's less about really providing transportation, but really meeting people where they are and recognizing some of the needs and some of the transportation issues. A lot of this started before the pandemic, but the pandemic also, made us think twice. But whether it's applications and becoming a client, all the way to individuals who are clients and being able to provide alternatives to having to come to our office. We are inconveniently located downtown Charleston. So we recognize it is difficult to come downtown, whether that's flooding or just transportation generally, having access to public transportation, having access to your own transportation. So we make alternative opportunities available to become a client, to apply for services. You don't have to come in person. You can do so online. You can do so over the phone. And then for clients, we offer video appointments. We offer phone appointments to make sure that people, don't have to figure out how to get downtown, which is extremely inconvenient for everybody except for the employees. And then even for court hearings, we make sure that if transportation is an issue, perhaps we can get a WebEx or a virtual hearing or a phone hearing. And we have generally been, granted that by the court. So we always try to make sure that we can meet individuals where they are and recognize, they may not have access to public transportation. We have to still make sure that our free legal services are available to them.
Thanks, Cody. I always appreciate the work that you all do at Charleston Pro Bono. Let's go with you, Nick. And I'm just going in order by the way I see you all.
No, thanks, Kim. And thanks ever so much for this wonderful event tonight as well. So really happy to be here. So very quickly, my name's Nick Osborne. So I head up the Lowcountry Food Bank. I've been here at the food bank now for probably just over about 2 years. So for those of you who don't know us at the Lowcountry Food Bank, we've actually been around for 40 years. So we've been celebrating our 40th year this year. Our mission at the Lowcountry Food Bank is to lead the fight against hunger. in the coastal counties here in South Carolina. So our service area runs all the way down from Horry County right down to Jasper, right along the coast there. So dealing with a variety of different challenges and issues as it affects our neighbors in a variety of different ways, whether that be neighbors that are more populated in urban centers, but also those that are much more remote in a lot of the rural areas, which then of course transport becomes a key and major issue. So our focus is on the equitable access of healthy food, which for a lot of people and for a lot of us as well is often the most expensive food as well. And that's incredibly expensive, especially for those that don't have access to the high levels of resources that are needed. We work with a very strong and capable network of partner agencies. There's 230 of them spread out across the 10 coastal counties. Food pantries, community-based organizations who are at the heart of communities where we work. We also work with schools and libraries and clinics as well. And it's through that network that we're able to distribute and get the food, the equitable access to food that's required, and be able to serve probably in excess of about 200,000 food insecure children, families, veterans, and seniors in the programs that we do. So in terms of very quickly we acknowledge the challenges with transport probably in three different ways. First of all, the availability or the access to reliable transport and the challenges that presents to a lot of those that we support. Related to that is obviously the cost of transport as well, the high cost of transport, whether that be in terms of being able to afford public transport or just the running of your own vehicle, especially with inflation the way it is and the cost of fuel. But then also thirdly, with regards to transport, is the time spent traveling to be able to access services like food, especially in rural areas, as I said. And that's time that is spent having to access food that really is time that is so important and critical, which could also have been spent elsewhere as well in terms of accessing other services that are required. How do we address those? So obviously then we address those by trying to reduce the time spent having to travel to access food, the money, and also the distance traveled as well. And again, as I said, the critical part of that is with our 230 or so partner agencies. So it's being able to make sure that food is readily available or access to resources are readily available, which require the least amount of travel, the least cost associated with travel, and is available at the times and in the quantities that are required as well. We're also looking very much at filling gaps as well, because not always can those gaps be filled. We use mapping to help us identify where gaps are and providing mobile services, mobile access to food, especially food that is nutritious and fresh and is accessible for all at times when it's required. There's a number of other things, but those are the key areas that we work on, especially as it relates to transport.
Thanks, Nick. 200,000 is quite a reach, especially here in our region. Thanks for that. And sorry, fellas, but I saved the best for last. Apparently, we have Renee Linyard-Gary from Roper St. Francis.
Hi, thanks, Kim, and good evening, everyone. As Kim said, I am Renee Linyard-Gary, Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Health Equity at Roper St. Francis. Roper St. Francis is our nonprofit hospital system in the community. And we actually have 4 hospitals under the umbrella of Roper St. Francis Healthcare. You know, being in the healthcare community for over 20 years now, from the pharmacy to business intelligence and practice management, and on the front line of the work at Roper St. Francis, we are highly focused on equity for all, with our mission of healing all people with compassion, faith, and excellence. It's no wonder my actual title has health equity in it now, because it's so vital to make sure that we're living our mission. And in some of that work, as we talk about transportation, I've had the pleasure of being in that access to care space for 13 years now, building a community health worker and community navigator model within the region of the Tri-County to do exactly what Charleston Move has been our partner and advocate to do. when I was seated at Trident United Way, when I was seated at Roper, they've been that advocate and at the heart of the work. And so that helps us provide better care for our patients. I mean, we see things like missed appointments due to lack of transportation. For my time working in the pharmacy, you would see patients who don't come and get regular refills as they should because they might live in the rural part of the community. So that also impacts their care plan and their health outcome. But on top of that, it's also, we have decided to think about how do we build models to access transportation as hospitals and a healthcare system? How do we take on that economic burden that our patients have, but also that we have as a health system? Because if I'm talking about missed appointments and not getting access to the resources you need, we then want to step in and try to help. But there's some economic components that we have to budget in, or we have to, help support patients get access to transportation services. And that furthers our need to build partnerships with programs that offer things like rideshare. That also requires us to take in some of that to develop our own mobile programs. And that they're exhaustive at this point, but one such thing is even community paramedicine program that we took on at Roper St. Francis. We've coupled community health workers with having an SUV that goes out to the rural community and help people get to appointments, but not only to appointments, to pick up those medications that they can't get access to. And while they're there, you might be shopping for your groceries when you talk about the access to food to people that live in a food desert. So we have truly tried to take the whole patient-centered and provide those needs, not only just the medical, clinical needs, because we know that's 20% of someone's health outcome. We try to figure out how can we help address that other, 80%, but the 40 that we can impact as a health system. And I will also like to share that within my Department of Diversity and Inclusion, it's about equity for all, but also that health equity is in a lot of our programming, which we can get a little bit more into later. But we have several departments that focus on our underserved population, from the uninsured to people living with HIV and AIDS to our senior population. So we truly are trying to move the needle around health equity, and that includes transportation access.
Renee, you touched on it a little bit. I think what really impacts people, especially people who don't work in our spaces, is when we're able to hear those stories. So often we throw out the numbers, right? The stats and facts about the thing, but these are real life people. And so presenters like a Majora, where she's able to show those pictures and really give context and faces to the issues that we are encountering every day, it matters. So I'd love to hear from anyone on the panel. Tell us about a patient or client or situation where the Charleston transportation infrastructure was either a benefit, like it worked efficiently, or was just deficient in what you needed in order to give the best care to the people you're trying to serve.
I can speak to both briefly. I mean, our office is luckily located right next to a bus stop. And right around the corner from the courts downtown, located next to bus stop. So we have a lot of clients who utilize public transportation, are able to get to appointments due to that. So in a sense, they're able to efficiently utilize that. But we have a lot of individuals who miss appointments, whether that's due to the traffic issues that we have in Charleston County, whether that's due to flooding issues, whether that's due to, just trying to get out of work during their lunch break and use that. We have, as far as, how severe that can get, if individuals in our space kind of, even if they miss a hearing, if they're late to a hearing and that moves forward without them, the impact that could have could be life-changing. I mean, if it's an eviction action and you miss that hearing, it could be losing a roof over your head. If it's family law, it could be, having custody implications. So, there's some severe implications if you're having trouble with transportation. And we see it all the time, and we try to make ourselves aware of that, courts aware of that, and do the best we can. But I feel like if I'm going to look at both, when it's efficient and when it's deficient more often than not.
Cody, when I'm sitting in that I-26 traffic, I'm going to think about people who might be missing court, and I will remain humble. Nick, tell us how you all are managing.
Yeah, I would build on the similar example that Cody referred to as well, is the public transport, or the lack of availability of public transport, public transport that doesn't run to schedule, and the challenges that creates. I mean, from our perspective, especially someone that's having to go and look for food, a dependency on a public transport system that's not working properly. I mean, first of all, if you've got a public transport that isn't available on a regular basis, that means that you're going to tend to have to carry more food as well, and therefore the inconvenience of the challenges that presents to you as well. But also thinking about it from the perspective of food that's perishable as well. And you're carrying that on public, or carrying that in a way that you're having to wait for public transport for long periods of time. I mean, especially here in the Charleston context, where when you're in the height of the summer and the heat and what that creates as well. But then when you're on the bus as well, and there's no storage on a bus in order to make sure that food that's perishable is going to be able to still be edible by the time that you reach your destination as well. So the inconvenience of public transport, even when it's available, is not offering you the type of service that you require to be able to enjoy the food that you have the right to when you get home as well. So all of that creates untold difficulties for people that are having to find food in places that mean extended transport, reliance on public transport, and the impact that has on the quality of the food and the nutrition that they're able to bring into their household when they do finally get home.
Thanks for that, Nick. I know we've hit the 6:50, so we would love for questions to start coming into our chat box, because this is the time for you. And while we wait on those questions, I just got a comment in from Katie. Speaking of transit, Carter has a downtown Charleston transit survey going on now. And so if you want to give your own thoughts and opinions about how the Charleston transportation infrastructure works or does not work, we encourage you to go to that link that's in the chat box. I won't read it out because it's a few words connected, but please check the chat box and engage in the conversation. They need to hear from you. As we prepare for more questions, I have one from Mr. Champagne. How does Roper partner with Carter? Good one, Mr. Champagne. They also want to know about your partnership with Tri-County Link and/or BCD COG, the BCD COG, to help satisfy those customer needs or those patient needs. And he's extending it actually to the other panelists as well.
Yeah. And so when you think about Carter, for us, I know from the space that I've been in, it is to go and purchase those things like bus passes, right, for the patients. We have a great foundation at Roper St. Francis that can help us with some of that philanthropic support. So it's going and negotiating, when we buy a large number of bus passes for the patients who might need those services. But I think another opportunity that we had was even when we were moving the work with Healthy Tri-County, which is a partnership with our other hospital systems and Trident United Way, is to be a part of the planning conversations. When we're all seated at the table and we are bringing that voice, even for our patients, understanding the barriers that our patients run into when they might have to take two bus trips to get to a doctor's appointment, right? Or if you're in rural Berkeley, how do you get to your doctor's appointment where your specialist might be in another part of the Tri-County region, actually? Because when we get out to more rural markets, there's less of those specialty providers sometimes. So we have to think about that. But I think for us, it's been having that vehicle where we can come together and talk about these targeted issues and plan together. Many times our Chamber of Commerce is a big place where we can have those open conversations as well. But I think it's to be a part of the planning and be a part of those conversations. And I can tell you from leading our access to care work over the last 13 years, it has been to even go and sit. I see someone talking about local rapid transit, going to the meetings. I remember me and another co-chair talking about that, strategically going to those open sessions where we could have conversations when planning is happening. So that's where we try to partner many times and then use our resources, both human and financial, to partner with these other organizations focused on transportation.
Thanks, Renee. Actually, Cody, I want to pitch you a new question just for the sake of time, because they're coming in on the Q&A chat. Answer this for me. If you had to pick one funding priority to improve access to daily needs, what would it be?
I would probably say more public transportation options. They are limited what's available. And I mean, if you like bikes and bike lanes aside, because I'm thinking kind of traveling from maybe, larger distances. But I know I practice almost exclusively in magistrate courts. There's over 300 in South Carolina, but in Charleston, we have numerous magistrate courts. Some of them are quite rural and hard to get to. And then some of them have a bus stop right near them. So just having more opportunities for individuals to be able to utilize public transportation to get to important places. I mean, that's what I would go with, just because it's also going to alleviate traffic. It's like, I think during the pandemic, we saw a lot of individuals, obviously working remotely. We saw a huge decline in traffic and individuals out there. So I always try to think of as many opportunities to, maybe not for work, but for appointments and things like that, to have alternatives to having to go in person. But as far as investing in something, I would probably say much more public transportation options and bus stops, everything.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you too, Cody. Nick, I'm interested in hearing this from you because I know that you've done a lot of international work and national work. And so we had an attendee ask, what quality of life, workforce, and beautification opportunities do you imagine would make our community a good one with the Lowcountry Rapid Transit? So just given your experience around the world and throughout the country, how do you think the Lowcountry Rapid Transit would really help Charleston? Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Sorry, yeah. I think in terms of creating connectivity amongst communities and neighbors, I think one of the challenges that I would say is that with all of this development that's going on in Charleston at the moment, it seems to be happening in pockets all over the place. And it's not being done in a way that's giving thought for the different types of services that are required. But then how do you connect communities? I think the risk is that you're going to end up having communities as islands and being isolated from essential services that are required. And so as we start to think about the planning and the development that's going on, ensuring that that's done not purely just providing housing per se in these rapidly constructed apartments, but thinking about what are all the other services that need to go into that development as well. But also, and obviously that's not always going to be possible, but giving thought as to how you would connect that up and how do you create spaces that give the ability for people to enjoy life, be able to get out into an environment where they feel safe, that they can relax, especially coming home at the end of the day, for example, when they've faced lots of problems, but also having access to the necessary groceries, having access to bike lanes that enable easy transportation. So I think that and creating those green spaces that can create community and can create cohesion amongst communities as well. I think when you bring communities together, that offers the opportunity for communities to have a dialogue and express the challenges and the problems that they face, and then start to create opportunities and solutions. No different to what we heard from Majora today as well, that whole revitalization and the power that creates amongst community to feel empowered and the ability to realize that there are solutions that don't have to come from the outside, solutions that can be established from the inside and from within communities.
Nick, you made some really great points. In fact, we have another attendee in the chat who's talking just about that great revitalization, right? But they said some buzzwords like trigger words like Atlanta, traffic, taxes. How do we make sure that as we build these great high density opportunities and green spaces, that we're being conscious of the people who are often living in those green spaces, are living in those spaces that are often torn down for that development? And I'll pose that to anyone on the panel who wants to give feedback.
I mean,
Sorry, you got it.
Just very quickly, I mean, just to building on those, I mean, again, one of the examples, one of our partners that we work with is the Green Heart Project, for example, and the importance of creating access to food through the garden projects within communities, and the positive impact that can have, not just in terms of providing access to nutritious food, but also the environment that creates, and the bringing together of communities around that, to understand more about both the nutritional side of it, but also the environmental benefits and the socialization benefits around that as well.
Yeah, Kim, and that makes me think about when we talk about healthy eating, active living, you know, in our health assessment that we do community-wide, that's one of the pillars to health improvement. And when we think about green spaces and gentrification, it allows us to be, you know, healthy living. It's proven by evidence-based interventions. When you have more of that walkability and the space for people to get mobile, they're healthier, the communities are healthier. So I think that's an opportunity as well. You promote that healthy living, the active physical activity that can come with that. And I think about when someone mentioned other than like Atlanta and other places, I think just visiting my daughter like in Charlotte and being able to go downtown and get on the scooters or take a bike downtown. I think those are things that we can build into our Charleston County and downtown area as well. And you see some of that, but I think there's great communities that have taken that and turned it around. And I think we have some things to look to. And I think that goes back to that, where can we see the progress as we see more of those action items and tangible things happening in our community.
Renee, you're absolutely right. And just for the sake of time, Cody, we are expecting a dissertation about this tax issue that we think may come. But there are some other comments that I do want to acknowledge, because I think there are things that we need to keep in our mind as we continue to have this conversation offline. But Joe wants to make sure that we're measuring, defining success and measuring that for each organization and collectively. But Jackie makes a good point too. How can we be consistent in the infrastructures that we build? So we have some bus stops that are unsheltered and unpaved. How can we make sure that all of the bus stops are appropriate for people that are waiting, especially given what Nick mentioned, how things can be off schedule at times. So I would love to wrap up the conversation if I can get a 30-second elevator speech with Michelle's question. She says, this is such an on-point conversation, and she believes that the general population is just unaware of most of these challenges. There is power in numbers. So how can we get more of the community involved to help see some real improvements? 30 seconds, starting with Cody.
I mean, I will just say that I think we're trending in the right direction. I mean, obviously we're here having this conversation. I wasn't a party to this conversation exactly, but I did hear of it from an individual directly. But just recently, they decided that one of the 3 North Charleston magistrate courts is going to be moving to a new location in the fall. And a huge part of that conversation is we're going to pick a new location that's near a bus stop, going to have accessible handicap parking lot, easy to get to. I mean, ideally bike racks, everything like that. But even the little things where it's just like, okay, we just have to move from one location to another. It's just like, okay, well, let's think about that more concretely, and how do we make things more efficient, make more opportunities for public transportation, people getting there. So, you know, thousands of those little conversations start to add up and create, you know, a new environment where that's common, versus 10 years ago, maybe that wouldn't have been a part of the conversation when choosing a new building. So being able to hear that, and that's really was being taken into consideration. I mean, then being invited to talk on this, I mean, it seems like that's definitely a trend. And I know in our office, it has been a conversation for the last 2 years. So ideally, word of mouth. I mean, it doesn't have to maybe be a large, costly, tax-wise movement, but just, you know, spreads efficiently throughout everybody.
Yeah, the paradigm is shifting. What about you, Renee?
I think it's in the intentionality, you know, us all showing up today, having an organization like Charleston Moves to keep us in the right direction, going in the right direction, right? And that's that collective impact. Usually you have that backbone organization that's the driving force and keeping the priorities ahead of us. So staying in tune, sharing about Charleston Move and other organizations that do similar work. But I think it comes back to the intentionality. Policy. if I could have that, you know, and then that collective to what we talked about, but to sharing the stories about what you see, what you hear along the way, and just being, you don't have to always be invited to those spaces either, right? You can join where necessary, or do your own advocacy as well.
Charleston Move is keeping us on the move, no pun intended. And Nick, round us out, 30 seconds. How can we make sure that all people are a part of this conversation? Get some power in the numbers.
4 things. I think, first of all, I think continue to raise awareness. Keep the voices coming. Secondly, I think a realization there is no simple solutions and there is no one solution. Thirdly, I think the solution lies in the interconnectedness of understanding how all of these work in collaboration and together. And then fourthly, I think continuing to collaborate and working together. And that's where the solutions will lie. And that's how we'll make a move forward.
Nick, thank you so much. That was so succinct. We're going to make you a Baptist preacher before long, okay? This was such an amazing conversation. I thank you all for bringing your insights and knowledge and expertise to this very important conversation of transportation. And Katie, thank you for allowing me to host, and I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Thank you all so much. That you all are amazing. You're an amazing moderator, Kim. You guys did an excellent job on the panel, and to our audience, your questions, phenomenal. And, you know, won't solve everything with this today's discussion, but I think we're all of us, audience included, in it to solve this in the long term and want to keep having these discussions. So again, thank you to our presenters, our sponsors, our audience. I think what we learned this evening will help us all get engaged in advocating for a better community and leaning into the leadership and the knowledge of those most impacted by a lot of the change that's coming. And that's so important. And so we at Charleston Moves, we're ready to move forward together. We can be real pests sometimes, but that's what we're here for. But I just want to I really appreciate you all joining us for this. And this isn't the first conversation we've all had, and it's not going to be the last. So I'm looking forward to sticking it out together. And for those of you who want to keep up with all of these types of conversations and get engaged more, you can see on our website and on our social media, you can tap into the organizations that each of our panelists and our moderator represent. You can also go to charlestonmoves.org. You can follow us at Charleston Moves on Facebook and Twitter. We had Instagram got mad at us a few years ago, so we're now at Chaz Moves on Instagram. But we want you to keep it up, show up, speak out. We want to work on this together and keep moving forward. So have a wonderful night and thank you so much.
Katie, will the recording be online on your website or on YouTube?
We will put it on YouTube, but it'll link to our website. As you see, I had to look over at Savannah because she's really in charge over here. So yes, we will have it in all of the places. We'll share the link with everybody. So anybody who missed it or wants to rewatch can do so. And again, Majora is going to be here later this year in person, and we'll all get to hang out with her and talk more. So it'll be fun. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
y'all.
everyone.
Good night.